So this video is about substances that we get exposed to from the environment that have toxic effects on our bodies or other organisms. And we're going to look at the different categories of these effects. So I tend to start off with the possibly least impactful, because it's possible to get very mild reactions to allergens. So these are things that cause swelling, irritation, inflammation. They're things you can inhale, and so they tend to have an effect on your respiratory system. There are things that you can be exposed to by touching. So a lot of people are allergic to poison ivy or poison oak. But there's a range of reactions, right? Some people have very little reaction, whereas others break out in hives all over and get horrible reactions. But then on the far end of the spectrum, there is the severe or acute reactions. So somebody who's genetically predisposed to be allergic to something and has a very acute reaction. You can have swelling that causes your eyes to shut or your throat. And so that's called anaphylaxis. So while some allergens are just irritating and annoying, like if you sneeze because of pollen in the air or dust, it's also possible to have, on the other end of the spectrum, death from these kinds of things. And this is stuff that's in the environment. Some of it is man-made, so there are medications that cause allergic reactions, but a lot of these are prevalent in the environment because of living organisms. Also coming from a lot of living organisms are neurotoxins. These are substances that impact the nervous system, and because it's part of it, the brain can be impacted. The nervous system also controls muscle response, and so a lot of neurotoxins that are produced by wild animals are, the whole purpose is for them to paralyze their prey. So for example, we see these fish that are caught in the tentacles of a jellyfish. Its stinging cells produce neurotoxins that paralyze. So too do a lot of snakes, the poisonous snakes. On the other hand, we have substances that are neurotoxins that are produced by tiny things like dinoflagellates. This is a microscopic organism, and that's more of a defense against predators response rather than capturing prey. So a lot of living organisms that are producing these toxins that impact the nervous system of vertebrates like us. However, there are non-biological substances. So for example, this is the effect of mercury. This is referred to as Minamata disease because this is an example of somebody getting exposed to very high levels of mercury, which impair the ability of the brain and the nervous system to control the muscles. And so you see that the muscles of the hand got very contracted, and so Minamata disease occurred in Japan when a lot of mercury was released into a bay, and so the fish were exposed to high levels of mercury, and people were eating fish, and so a lot of people ended up with debilitating body deformities because of that. Okay, I've grouped mutagens and carcinogens together because they're pretty closely related. Mutagen means something that causes damage to DNA, and carcinogen means to cause cancer, and oftentimes a substance is going to be both. So what we mean by mutation is that something breaks the DNA either on a molecular level or on a chromosomal level, and when the body tries to repair that, mistakes are made and you end up with a mutation. We have examples of things like radiation. Energy causes this. Chemicals, compounds, many of which are found in cigarettes. And then also you can have mutations caused by organisms like HPV, which is a virus that causes a mutation. And that can also lead to cancers. So cancers, for those of you who don't remember, that's an uncontrolled cell growth. So for example, here we have one cell that should really just replace itself when it dies, but instead there are far too many cells that are being grown because the mechanisms for recognizing that there's no space, those have been turned off. So this is a cancer, and if those cells migrate away, you can have a malignant cancer. So we have a lot of things in the environment that can cause that, some of which are those mutagens, but others are things like asbestos that irritate the lungs and cause uncontrolled growth as the body tries to protect itself. Another category of substance is a teratogen. This is something that works on a developing fetus. So we might be familiar with the fact that you're not supposed to drink too much alcohol when you're pregnant, and that's because we can get growth defects that happen as the teratogen, the alcohol, impairs the fetal growth. Substances like mercury or even diseases can cause this. And the most famous example is a chemical medicine called thalidomide. It's a very, very effective anti-nausea drug, which when women started taking that to deal with morning sickness, it unfortunately was discovered to be a teratogen, and so this is an example of a child that was born with no arm development, and that's because this drug impacted the development of the baby while it was in utero. And then finally, we have the category of substances that are called endocrine disruptors. Remember, the endocrine system is the system that uses hormones to send signals throughout the body through the blood system. And so you can have a couple of different things that can happen. You can have chemicals that act like a hormone, and so those actually cause responses when the body was not trying to initiate that. Or you can have substances that block hormones and prevent the kinds of important signals that should happen inside the body. And so we have some examples of the pesticide atrazine has been found to be an endocrine disruptor, and we have examples of frogs that were exposed to atrazine developing multiple legs because their body reacted to something that was saying, oh, it's time to grow legs, when really it wasn't, and so they have extra pairs. We also see sometimes that substances can act as though they are like estrogen and testosterone, and so we've found, research has found that some fish have developed both types of gonads even when they were not supposed to, and they're referred to as intersex, meaning they're neither male nor female. While that happens normally in certain species, we've found examples of that in species that should not have hermaphroditic organisms. And then one of the big problems or sources of these endocrine disruptors is the amount of birth control substances, so progesterone and other compounds that are actually getting into the wastewater treatment plants from humans, because we take chemical birth control, and that is not removed by the wastewater treatment processes for the most part. And so these chemicals continue to act as those signals, mimicking the hormones in other species, because we are closely enough related, and they are just close enough that they can tell another organism's body to start producing either testosterone, or they can even tell it, okay, it's time to start developing gonads. So this is an issue that we're starting to see. The other example that people have been interested in is bisphenol A, BPA, which is a substance added to plastics to help with plus like flexibility, and that turns out to leach into liquids and then act as a hormonally active agent, which is another synonym for this.